think I'm told I'm supposed to start. Hi guys, I was going to ask the entire crowd to quiet down, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I'll shoot forward from here. Can you guys hear me okay? Not too bad? I'll try and keep this thing close to my mouth, right? So, a couple of bits. My name's Lawrence Peltier. I'm actually based in Melbourne, but I do spend a lot of time here in the UK. We have an office here, so I've told in the last 12 months I think I've spent 3 months of my time here, so I haven't quite picked up the accent. I do speak a little bit funny, I must tell you, so I'm Canadian, living in Australia, speaking in the UK, so my accent has gone back to Canadian for some reason, I don't know why. What else do I need to tell you? I think I'll jump ahead and start talking about what we're going to talk about. So I wanted to say the first thing was that the Australian hospital market is actually quite similar to the UK hospitality market, right? We might use some different terms, so it might be hospo versus hospitality, right? But it fundamentally is very similar. So a couple of bits. One is population. So population of Australia, about 25 million. So almost triple the population here in the UK. Second bit though is cultural diversity, right? So especially if you look at city centres, right? If you look at city centres here, the city centres here and in Australia are very similar, very multicultural, very mixed. The mix of those people is a little different in the two countries, but very similar. And then when you get out into the regions, you know, it becomes less multicultural, basically. A very, very similar pattern. The prevalence of quick service and fast casual restaurants, though, is really similar across the two countries, right? Different, but very similar. And so there's this trend towards those two types of businesses. And the challenges are really similar, right? So if you look at whether it's, for example, the lack of hospitality staff, right? As in the difficulty getting good staff, or if you look at things like the cost of living crisis, very, very similar across both places. And fundamentally, this one. So both countries have this fractured tech stack problem, right? Which is what we're going to talk about. So the first question is, what is a fractured tech stack, right? And I thought there was a couple ways I could start to explain it, or my perspective on this fractured tech stack. So if you looked at the technology that you use in a typical hospitality business, and you laid it out on the board and said, you know, what are all my components? And this is representative of everything from point of sale to your rostering system to all the bits and pieces that you use, right? It starts like this. But the challenge is, it looks a lot like this, right? So all of those things combined, right, start to get pretty messy pretty quickly. And if I took you through a little bit about how that develops and how we kind of get to that place, it looks a little like this. You know, usually somebody will open a shop and they'll start simple. They'll have, let's just say they have their point of sale system, right? And as they open more shops and their world gets a little more complicated, they'll add more touch points to the consumer, right? So you might add your rostering solution. You might end up integrating into an accounting system, whether that's Xero or whatever it is, right? Again, you open more shops, you start adding things in no particular order. You'll start adding more things to deal with consumers more effectively, right? So that might be click and collect, a kitchen management system, your KDS system, QR code ordering system. At some point, you'll add a loyalty system, which anybody who's been there will say, okay, that actually starts to get very complicated, right? Because as I get that loyalty system added in, now I want loyalty to work everywhere. So we'll talk about that a bit. Mobile apps, maybe kiosks, maybe some inventory or stock control, right, at some point. Again, no particular order. And then through that journey, a lot of those hospitality businesses will start to then add different delivery mechanisms, right? And anybody who's in that business will know that starts to add a lot of complication around your procedures. And when you start to join all those dots, you've come back to the spaghetti that I showed you in the last slide, right? You actually end up in a pretty complex place. And this is what we call the fractured tech stack. it starts to look like Frankenstein's monster, right? So you actually have a bunch of components that have been attached that are functional, sort of working, but causing a lot of trouble, right? So how do I move past that? What do I do about it? Well, first thing is to say, well, what are the challenges that I'm getting from having this stack, right? What's the problem I'm generating? First challenge is support, multi-vendor support, right? So I've now got a lot of different systems that are supporting my business, and those systems are generally supported individually by the different companies that represent them. And I had a great example the other day. It was a colleague in the UK. I sent him an email. His automatic reply came and said, I'm out of the office right now. If you are contacting us internally and you need some help, like if you're from one of our shops, here's the list of who to call, right? And I kid you not, it probably had 15 different points of contact, So if your problem is like this, call this person. If it's like this, talk to this company. If it's like this is a really big problem, right? Where you're supporting this tech stack becomes really tricky. The second thing is data, or data, depending who you are, right? So when you look at data and you say, well, how do I understand what's happening in my business? Because you've got this fractured scenario, right? Where you actually have so many different suppliers. Your data tends to sit in little pools, it's actually isolated. There's some things you can do. You can use BI tools, for example, to try and bring that together and understand it. The challenge there is that you might have data that it doesn't match well, right? So it's difficult for you to understand the real value of all those pieces of data because you can't put them together effectively or maybe timely, right? So it's a difficult challenge. Third thing is the depth of integrations. So often when you start to connect these things, either they don't integrate, or if they do, it's tricky to get them to effectively integrate. And everybody talks about, open APIs and we publish the APIs, it'll be fine. But you'll always have a challenge connecting any two systems because they'll have different points of references, right? And different understanding of how things work. A good example, I had a conversation yesterday where a gentleman was trying to connect two systems. One of them, it was around inventory, right? The details don't matter, but one of them could only count up to 999 things, right? And the other system went into the tens of thousands. So how do you integrate two systems that actually, at a fundamental level are incompatible, right? So when everybody says, oh yeah, don't worry, those things will integrate, you always have to be very careful and put a lot of effort into understanding what that really means. The other one that happens in this scenario where I've got all these different systems running is how do I manage my menus? So when we're talking about menus, what we're talking about is everything from maybe product images, all my allergens, my different price points, all the different components that make up your menu. How do I effectively manage that? And again, I put to you, a lot of people are managing that in probably 10 or more places, right? Where they're literally going, okay, when I do a change, I now have to manage that through this checklist and work my way through different systems. If you're very lucky, you're doing it in 2 or 3 places or 4 places, but I've talked to people with more than 10, 12, 15 places. So a big challenge in this fractured tech stack. And the last one I've got here is loyalty. So a very big challenge is how do I properly acknowledge or respect my consumer, right, in all the different places that I'm interacting with them. So it's quite common for somebody to say, well, in my journey, I've decided this is my loyalty organization I want to work with, and it's integrated into my point of sale. Oh, that's fantastic. Now I can serve my customers. But I challenge you to say, well, how many of those companies can also do the same thing or the appropriate thing, maybe at a kiosk or click and collect or QR code ordering? How do I make sure that as a consumer I feel equally loved, right, no matter how I'm dealing with the organization? Right, big challenge. So, how do you fix this, right? What am I going to do about this? Because it's great for me to sit up and tell you guys, yeah, here's the problem. You're in a lot of trouble. So there's probably 3 ways that I've seen people approach the problem, right? And try to minimize the effects and fix it. First one's through middleware. So middleware is an interesting approach. That's when somebody goes out, generally they'll buy something off the shelf, and there's a bunch of different systems, some things like MuleSoft and things. They go in and buy that piece of middleware off the shelf, and they take responsibility for connecting everything together, right? So they build their own, in a sense, their own solution, usually through commercial middleware, and build it up. Now, there's a company in Australia I know that does this. They do a great job, but I'll tell you now, they have more than 100 people in their tech group managing this, all right? I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but it is one approach. I can fix it myself, but I will take responsibility for making this all work, right? The second approach, quite common, is partnerships and APIs. That's where you get everybody together that's in your tech stack, and you say, could you please play together nicely, right? I would love you to all just work. And that's about managing relationships and trying to, it's almost like project managing the individuals and saying, I'd really love you to, I need this to work here and this to work here. Again, often not that hard, well, it's always challenging, right? But often you'll see people work together. Where I see that to become a problem is when people are kind of going second level connections. So back to what I said about loyalty, right? I'm gonna have my loyalty system connected to my POS, that's fantastic. I got a kiosk system connected to my POS, that's pretty great. Yep, we're all happy. But getting the loyalty system to connect into the kiosk, that becomes a bit of a challenge, right? So as you start to try and get multiple connections happening throughout your tech stack, again, that can become quite a challenge. And the third approach is to use a platform, right? Now I have to just unabashedly say that my company builds a platform, right? So you can tell I'm going to lean that direction, but I think it's important to say that people solve this problem in all three approaches, right? Each one can work. The platform means you go to somebody and you say, I would like you, Mr. Platform, to take responsibility for this problem and make it all work for me, right? So if you look at those three, it's middleware, build it myself, partnerships, get everybody to work together, platform, kind of outsource the problem almost, right? I want somebody else to fix it. So we'll just go through quickly about some thoughts on those three, right? So the middleware approach, it's really high effort, right? So it's not a simple thing to say, I will take responsibility and I will manage this, because there's a lot of project management and a lot of people power involved. So my second point is, it's also expensive. So you have to be a big enough organization to take this on board and say, I will make this happen. So again, the group I talked about before, they'd have 150 plus restaurants, right? And they've said, yep, we think we can do this. But they've almost become a tech company rather than a food company, right? They're a tech company that happens to sell food. Third thing is, good point, right? In a middleware approach, generally you're going to get best of breed, because you are picking companies that you would like to work with, right? That you think are the best fit for you. And you're getting them all to work together, because you're, again, taking responsibility to connect them all. So you generally are getting a best of breed approach. It's high maintenance, because the other thing to think about is this one. Once you build it, right, you're never going to finish, because as soon as you build it, somebody will come out with something else that you need, right? So it could be, in our world, it could be things like maybe Uber Direct coming out with third-party delivery. So you may have built this entire system and then go, oh, that's right, now I need to add on third-party delivery. There'll always be something else. Ordering food through Google. Okay, how do I integrate into that? There'll always be something else. And a challenge I didn't write down in the middleware approach, sometimes it can be difficult to deal with some of the larger organizations. So Google's a good example. Google's lovely, but if you went to them and said, hey, I have my own middleware, I'd like to connect to ordering food through Google, you'll probably struggle to get their attention to perform that integration into your middleware, right? Can I just ask really quick, who here has heard of ordering food through Google? Is that a thing yet for anybody here? So it's an interesting one, a whole different topic. Interesting one. It is coming to the UK. They're launching it in the next little while. You can find it a little bit when you're Googling stuff. You'll see, and it actually leads straight into a click and collect or a delivery experience. It's a very cool integration. It exists in Australia, so we do it now. It's really good. So partnerships and API. Okay, first thing, there's a lot of different players to coordinate, so you're taking it upon yourself to actually start trying to get a lot of people to work together nicely and play together nicely and get them to build something for you, right? And you're going to have lots of moving parts, because one of the challenges in this scenario is that if there is a problem somewhere, like in an order gets lost or something like that, it's very difficult to track down, well, where did that problem occur? How did that problem occur? How do I fix it, right? There's a challenge there because you have a lot of moving parts connected together. Arguably, though, you can get pretty close to best of breed because you are actually, hopefully, working with the customers that are the solution components that fit your business really well, right? So you're picking the best ones, and as long as they'll work together, you're able to get closer to a best of breed scenario. You can get a lot of problems with intercompany. You might have two companies that don't get along very well. So they might go, well, I'd love to work with you, but I don't want to integrate with that particular company, right? So you do get some issues around. You have less choices in the picking compared to, say, the earlier one where you're taking responsibility. And change is difficult. So once you do this, if you then want to substitute somebody out and put something else in, right, that can be pretty challenging because it's a complex environment that you built and you're trying to manage that, right? So the last one's a platform approach. So on the positive side, with a platform, you're outsourcing the problem. So it is one throat to choke. So from a support and from figuring out what a problem is that's happening within your system, you've got one company to talk to. On the negative side, you're probably going to have a little more limited choice. Like in terms of the components, generally a platform will say, well, this is how we approach that particular problem. If it's a kiosk, for example, they might say, well, we do it ourselves, or these are our two choices, whatever it is. You probably have a more limited selection, right? I think this is probably the most important one. In this platform approach, because you're outsourcing it to somebody else, you have to be very careful who you choose. You have to be choose very wisely, right? Because it's not really a partnership, it's almost a marriage. Because whoever you go with is now going to control your world a fair bit. And so you're probably looking at things like, what's their reputation like? What's their longevity? How long have they been around? Is their customer base similar to my business? So, because remember, now I'm beholden to them. So are they going to be developing in the same direction that I want to work in? And do they have a support structure that's going to help me? Because sure, it's great that I've got one place to call, but are they going to answer the phone, and am I going to have a good support experience? And the last thing is, in this, you want to make sure that the integrations that the platform's going to do are very deep, so that the integration almost becomes part of the platform, right? So that it's, again, you're in a happy place. So if I go back, and I said, well, so there's the three options to fix this, right? One is that you take a middleware approach and you say, I can fix this. I'm going to run a project. I'm going to make this happen. Again, usually that one's only for the largest organizations to make happen, right? Second one is partnerships and APIs, much more common. That's probably the most common, that people actually go and say, I'm going to connect a bunch of pieces together and I'm going to do my best to make this provide a solution that fits my business. Right? And the third is the platform, where you go and say, I'm going to find a company that I'm going to partner with, and I'm actually going to make this work. But I'm going to get them to make it work for me. And if you do that really well, right, you end up with a unified tech stack, which is really what we all want. And again, there's three ways to get there. There's three routes. But I think that's actually the challenge. Questions? Discussion? Young lady in the front? Do you want a microphone? Wow, I have a roving mic. How exciting. Try this.
Thank you. Lawrence, you said that you mentioned somebody doing middleware and having a very big technical team. Can you give us an example of somebody who's gone the platform approach and the sort of savings they've made in terms of the amount of time they've freed up in terms of their technical team and their people, freeing up that time?
I can give you an interesting one. So if you look at a company that does two of those approaches, right? So we'll use Nando's. Hope there's nobody here from Nando's, so I don't get too much trouble. So Nando's in the UK does the first approach, the middleware approach, right? So they basically have said, we can do this, we'll build it. So Nando's UK would have, at a rough guess, more than 150 staff in their tech world, right? Nando's in Australia does, it's actually Nando's Australia, New Zealand, right? Similar, slightly smaller, but similar size group. So Nando's makes their money in three key markets: South Africa, the UK, and Australia, New Zealand. So each one's kind of similar. So the Australian New Zealand group in that same tech team, they use a platform. Those guys would have, it's less than 10 people. Probably it's 8 people or something. So it gives you an idea. It doesn't mean, you might look at the one in the UK and say, oh, but maybe that's more fit for purpose. But you'd also say, I have 15 times more people, 20 times more people, right? So it's that cost-benefit analysis of what's going to work for you. But I'd say, again, you have to be big enough to be able to afford to do your own. And if you're smaller, you might start out thinking you're doing a middleware project, but I think you'll end up in that partnerships and APIs world, really. Like you'll start to build it and then you'll lean into the getting other people to integrate to each other, right? Does that help? Anyone? Oh. I have a runner now too. There's a lot of power in this.
Very good talk. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just go a little bit closer. That's better.
Can you give an indication of the costs involved in the platform approach?
Yeah, that's always a good question. So each of those three models, I think, has quite different costs and approaches, right? Generally, so I'll try and generalize away from us, right? But generally in a platform model, you'll find that people will roll up the cost into some sort of a monthly cost, right? There may be a headquarters cost possibility, maybe an upfront and a setup and a monthly cost at headquarters, depending who the company is. And then usually it'll be like a monthly fee. And I would just say generally, you'd find that monthly fee that you'll pay a platform should be less than the sum of all of the components if you bought them individually. You just about always find that there's some benefit in putting your eggs into that one basket. It's a risk, right? Because you're going with a platform. But generally you'll find that the sum of the components is less in a platform than it is in the... So they're not necessarily cheap, right? It's not the cheapest way to do something. But again, if you correctly value all of the bits that you're putting together into the one, usually it's a savings. Does that help? You just have to make sure that it's fit for purpose for you. Like you have to look at that and say, this makes sense in this package. Because if it doesn't, then it's better to go back one step and say, you know what, I'm going to get everybody to talk to each other and do the APIs approach. And it's just horses for courses. Like sometimes that is a better way to do it. I feel like I got off the hook very easily. That was quite good. No mean questions. No difficult questions. Thank you, everybody, for that. That was great. Thank you for that.